Welcome to A Ride on the Outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
So Zain, what do you want to talk about this week?
Everything. Absolutely everything. Because that's what this show has in store this week. Oh my goodness, what a crazy last 12 hours we've had in the combat sports world. All I can say is, wow.
Wait, what did you say? You said all that you could say is,
Wow.
Yep, that's exactly what I said.
I'm Tom Albano, that's Zain Bando. Welcome to episode number 38 of the MMA Outsiders. As you kind of alluded, Zain, quite the interesting 24 hours. So we go from, Zain, that our focus is going to be this Haney Lomachenko fight, which is still one of the biggest fights in boxing this year, and I can't wait to see it, to now, all of a sudden, complete madness in the news sphere. Madness in the PFL sphere. Madness in the UFC sphere. Madness everywhere. This fight's getting signed. This fighter is getting signed. I might be getting signed too. So,
Yeah.
everything is kind of out of control. So, I'm gonna get the stuff out of the way first, the intro stuff out of the way, so we can jump right into this. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here on the Empty the Bench Network, including the MMA Outsiders, Empty the Bench, Game On, Produce Zero, so much more. Make sure to follow us across social media at MMA Outsiders, ETB, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Make sure to follow the network on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at ETB Network. That's Zain Bando. You can find his work over at bjpen.com. He's a staff writer there. You can follow him on Twitter at ZainBando99. He is a Bellator Rankings Committee member. I am Tom Albano. You can find my work over at Fansided MMA. You can follow me on Twitter at Thomas J. Albano. And maybe there might be something in the PFL in the works.
Yeah, let's just leave it at that.
So, PFL is going to be talked about a lot on this show, no doubt. And I'm going to just put that forward out there. If it seems like I'm not talking too much during the PFL segments, I'm just gonna leave it out there, and you do the math. Also, I forgot to also mention in the intro, go to etbpodcast.com, our official website for the network, for everything information wise about the network and the blogs that I've been cranking out. Shout out to Hank and Jen, Slap Shots Fired. Who knows, maybe an MMA or boxing blog might be needed very, very soon with all this going on. And don't forget, we also have the audio-only streaming platforms. So if you don't want to see Zain and I's faces, you can take MMA Outsiders with you on the road. You can listen in your car. You can listen on your phone, anywhere. And if you are listening on the audio-only platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Acast, all that, don't forget to check out the YouTube channel where you can see the video stream and get easy access to everything. All right. Out of the way. Zain, I think it's time we talked about the Predator. I think it's time we talked about the former UFC heavyweight champion. We thought it was going to happen last week. Didn't happen last week. But now, some 24 hours before this show airs, we have the news drop. Francis Ngannou's free agency period is over, and he is signing a deal with the Professional Fighters League. And Zain, it is a deal unlike anything I think I have ever seen when it comes to an MMA fighter and a promotion.
Yeah, not just anything like you've ever seen before. This is a groundbreaking deal for someone who has presumably been out of competition for over a year and a half. And I'm going to go on the record saying this is the biggest MMA heavyweight free agent signing since Fedor Emelianenko made his blockbuster move to Strikeforce in 2009. You thought that deal was a big deal back then? This is light years above anything that Fedor signed for about 14 or so years ago. This is going to shake up the MMA world and, quite frankly, the combat sports world in ways that we've never seen before.
So let's get into the details of everything. So the news was officially broken yesterday morning by the New York Times, and then everybody else followed suit. So Francis Ngannou has signed a deal with the PFL. It is a multi-fight deal. Obviously, this comes, as you said, Zain, about a year and a half after his last fight with the UFC, and 4 months after, I'd say almost exactly 4 months to the day, where he and the UFC officially parted ways, where Dana sat at that press conference and said that Francis Ngannou was no longer under UFC contract, and the World Heavyweight Championship of the UFC's heavyweight division had been vacated. So here are some of the deals. And actually, what's funny, Zain, you mentioned the word groundbreaking. That was actually used in a statement made by PFL CEO Peter Murray. Francis Ngannou, as expected, will take part in the super fight pay-per-view division. However, he will not make his PFL debut until 2024. Because the deal that we're going to go over is only on the MMA side. As part of this deal, he will have certain access to boxing fights, and the expectation is that he will compete in the boxing ring at some point during the second half of this year. But there is little to no detail as to who an opponent is, who when that fight would take place, etc. Some of the other things that are going on with this deal. So, let's see. Which do we want to do? I think we should have a look at the Ariel Helwani tweet, because that was actually one that I had made a little reference to in a breaking news. So,
wait, before you get to that, I'd like to read part of the press release that the PFL sent out to all assembled media earlier this morning. This is from Peter Murray, the PFL CEO. It says the PFL is excited to announce its groundbreaking strategic partnership with Francis Ngannou, the greatest heavyweight MMA fighter in the world. Ngannou will anchor the PFL star-studded pay-per-view super fight division, serve on PFL's Global Athlete Advisory Board, and will be chairman and an equity owner in PFL Africa. Beyond working with Francis to advance the sport of MMA and scale PFL globally, I'm personally looking forward to supporting Francis and his commitment to fight for communities in Africa around the world, inspired by his vision for the Francis Ngannou Foundation. So that's just a piece of a very extensive press release that was sent out to assembled media that essentially explains in further detail what this Francis Ngannou deal actually means for the promotion and, quite frankly, the sport of MMA.
So the deal gives Ngannou, as kind of hinted in the press release, quote, equity and leadership roles. He is going to be the chairman of the newly launched PFL Africa, which will look to bring fights over to Africa. We have actually seen the PFL. I guess this is another chapter of their little expansion outside the United States with, the Challenger Series, the Europe Series, and all of that. You also got, Zain, a couple of other interesting little tidbits, which I'm trying to bring up right now. I'm trying to bring up the bloody elbow piece, which actually was very detailed and laid a lot of stuff out about this contract. So the deal would supposedly guarantee Ngannou close to 8 figures, an amount that Bloody Elbow says is told was more than what the UFC's final offer had been for every title defense. Because Zain, remember, he's in the PFL super fight division, that means he gets a cut of the pay-per-view purchases for the pay-per-view revenue whenever he does fight in the PFL. He is a member of He does have a certain position on the PFL board in which he is basically going to be representing the fighters for fighter rights. And an interesting tidbit, Zain, which is actually we talked about last week. So last week we talked about how Francis wanted a certain pay figure, minimum pay figure for his opponents. And the original number in the deal, because the PFL is going to follow suit, that the original numbers in the original reports was $1 million. However, Francis, in later interviews that he's done with Ariel Helwani, DAZN, etc., in the past 24 hours, says it is a $2 million minimum payout for his opponents.
Yeah, I mean that just goes to show the power that the PFL has given Francis now allows him to do things that he wouldn't have been able to do in any other promotion. So that'll be interesting to see with that $2 million price tag for his opponents, how many heavyweights will be more than willing to compete against him in the near future. I think this next year is going to be very interesting to see A, who the PFL signs, and B, how they market not just the PFL super fight division, but the PFL heavyweight division, just because they're still trying to become that official number 2. And I think this signing, further solidifies that they are pushing to be that number 2 MMA promotion in the world, if they aren't already.
Now, I want to bring up an interesting point you talked about, Lexi, because you talked about Zain, and a lot of people have still talked about that Francis Ngannou. I see the term being thrown around on social media, fumbling the bag, because we have the whole thing about, obviously, this pretty much shuts the door dead on any chance that we're going to get Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. But you look at this kind of deal that Francis Ngannou got, and kind of like you were saying before, Zain, it seems like, everything that, I don't know if I should say everything, but certain things that he was looking for, where, everybody was told that he was crazy, the PFL just goes, done, and gives him it. So, I mean, do you see this still as a downgrade for Francis Ngannou? Do you see this more as a win for Francis Ngannou because he's got what he wants? Do you see this as a win for the PFL? Like, how do you view this deal? Obviously, hindsight is going to be 2020 once this deal is actually done and Francis Ngannou, or Francis Ngannou leaves MMA. But how do you look at this deal as of right now?
It's a very good question. I think I look at it from several different perspectives. So I'm going to try to break it down the best I can in kind of 3 parts. Part 1 is the fact that Francis Ngannou is now walking away from presumably the biggest fight in UFC heavyweight history and one of the biggest fights in UFC history. That's part 1. Whether you like it or not, that fight was more so a dream than a reality for much of the last 3 years. Like, it's a fight that everyone wanted to see, but knew that there had to be a lot of moving parts for it to happen. For a lot of people, sadly, we're just going to have to accept the fact that it probably will never happen unless some sort of miracle happens and either Jones decides to sign with the PFL in a few years, which is doubtful, or if some other way that fight comes to fruition. So that's part 1. That's kind of the downside, because the fans lose in terms of the fact that the biggest fight now in UFC heavyweight history is no longer going to happen. And now the question of where's Francis's place in UFC history is up in the air because of this. The second side of this whole thing is that Francis got exactly what he wanted. The only thing you can be is happy for him at this point, just because he's waited over a year and a half for something like this. I don't remember which podcast it was on, but someone was like, I'm sure you remember Dana didn't put the belt on you after you beat Don. And he started laughing. He goes, I don't care. That just proves my point that he was upset because he didn't have power and leverage over me. So I think that's something else you have to keep in mind too, that Francis was just waiting for the egg to crack. And after UFC 270, it finally did. Well, his ACL and his knee and whatnot was a bit of an issue. The fact of the matter is that Francis was really just waiting for that moment for the UFC to say I give, which that was the beginning of the end. Side 3, to answer the third part of your question, of course this is big for the PFL. PFL has waited for a signing like this ever since they signed Kayla Harrison. Nobody knew who Kayla Harrison was when she first came to the PFL. Now she's known as one of the biggest female MMA fighters in the world in terms of popularity. You get a guy like Francis Ngannou, who's the former UFC heavyweight champion. This is without question the most important day or the most important few days, rather, based on the time of when this is being released to our audience in company history. So, of course, this is a win for the PFL. But the biggest question is A, who is Francis Ngannou going to fight first in MMA? And B, how the heck is PFL going to sell this as if it is the biggest fight in heavyweight history? Simply because I think the biggest issue is when you compare PFL's roster to the UFC's, it's really hard to compare talent level when the UFC has the best fighters in the world. So it's going to be very interesting to see from a marketing perspective how PFL spins this so people are more interested in buying it, because quite frankly, I think the biggest name that Francis Ngannou could fight in the PFL first is Fabricio Verdum, and we know that Fabricio Verdum obviously is way up there in age and was a heavyweight champion about 6 or 7 years ago now. So just the biggest question is going to be, who is Francis going to fight? Obviously, to conclude, though, a very important day for the PFL. And let's face it, they got their guy that they wanted. So there you go.
Well, here was going to be my question, because I know in the past couple of episodes you said, "Oh, well, Francis Ngannou, he needs to look himself in the mirror." Blah blah blah. Are you kind of and we had the report from about how Chatri from One Championship basically said, that Francis was asking for too much. So my first question, Zan, is I guess we can see now truth to both sides of the story, where Francis would have told him about the PFL deal because he is getting all of this. And second of all, as part of that, are you surprised the PFL gave him almost everything that he seemed to ask for?
Yeah, I'll be quite honest. I am surprised, just given the fact that the PFL is still trying to cater to a mainstream audience. And I mean, this is one way you do that. And it also sends a message that the PFL is looking to evolve the sport of MMA. And I think it's quite obvious that them doing these sorts of things, like giving him a spot on the board of directors, allowing his opponents to make millions of dollars just to fight him, I think it goes to show that there can be a way forward in MMA in terms of guys or women or men, for that matter, getting fairer compensation. And I think this is one step towards that. My whole rant from a couple weeks ago was more so based on the fact that I was upset from a fan's perspective, because I had been waiting to see Jones versus Ngannou for a long time, as had everyone. I mean, the last time that you saw a massive UFC heavyweight championship fight, you have to go back to the time when Cain Velasquez was still heavyweight champion and he was fighting Junior Dos Santos. So I think more so, as a matter of fact, or I guess you'd say Stipe versus DC also. But my point in saying all of this is that from a fan's perspective, I totally understand the people who are upset, because now not a rebirth in the heavyweight division, so to speak, but a culmination of the biggest heavyweight title fight in UFC history is no longer going to happen. So I think that's the biggest downside, is Jones is not going to be able to say, like, "Oh, I'm the greatest of all time and I beat the scariest heavyweight the promotion had ever seen." Now he could walk off into the sunset saying, "Hey, I assuming he fights next, I beat Stipe Miocic, but I can never have that last crack at a guy that's been calling my name out for several years," or what have you. So I think that's the best way as to how I can answer that.
And they're still calling each other's names out. The two traded barbs on social media earlier in the day that we're recording this.
Yep.
So they're still joining at one another despite all that. So I actually, to answer the, who should be first question, obviously, you mentioned how PFL should still go on the signing spree. But I actually want to take, speaking of PFL, a tweet that I saw from you. You were interacting with somebody from the PFL, well, ESPN, the PFL's partner, Ian Parker, and he was
I
talking
sure,
about.
I sure was.
And I think Zain, you kind of made a point when you were tweeting with him, in that the whole question about it right now isn't even so much who he's gonna fight when he debuts for the PFL in 2024. It's gonna be, who is he gonna fight later this year if he is gonna have this boxing match. Now, we've heard rumors over the last 4 months. Tyson Fury. We've heard that supposedly there was going to be a tune-up to the Tyson Fury fight with, I think it was Derek Chisora, Deontay Wilder,
Derek Chisora or Daniel Dubois.
or Deontay Wilder is supposedly still in the mix. Maybe some questions about, considering his recent arrest. But I mean, Nate Diaz was recently charged, and we've got still a fight with him and Jake Paul on for August 5th, which we're going to talk about their first press conference a little later.
And I can't wait to bring up a little theory that I found, a couple of days ago, or now during the time that we're recording this, that actually I think could make a whole lot of sense. But I'm going to let you continue on.
Okay, so let me just get to my question then. What do you see happening for this supposed boxing fight that's going to happen later this year?
I think it's going to be a tune-up fight, and I think it's going to be no one all that exciting. It'll be Chisora or Dubois, probably somewhere on the West Coast, or they could do something international, but I don't see it. It'll probably be a West Coast fight at some point in late July, early August.
For sure. Okay, I could definitely see something along those lines.
Now, the question that I have for you is, if he's going to box, I'm a little bit confused as to, is this under Top Rank? Like, how would he do this if he has this now exclusive deal with the Professional Fighters League?
My only guess is he would basically act as a sort of independent of sort for the boxing world.
Okay, so he could go wherever. He could go to Matchroom. He could go to Showtime.
That's my guess.
Yeah, I mean, that would make the most sense to me. I just wasn't sure if you knew anything I didn't, so I figured I would ask. Yeah.
Nope. So that's my only guess as to what could happen with this with the boxing side of this deal. Yeah.
I have another follow-up question for you.
Okay.
Do you think at the 11th hour the UFC tried to re-sign him and then they gave up, or do you think they didn't?
I don't think they did. I don't think so. I'm trying to actually, since you bring up the other offers, supposedly around the little news, around the tidbits, trying to find here and there across social media with our fellow MMA media colleagues. Seems like Bellator wished him the best of luck, but ultimately did not give an actual offer. One championship, I was kind of referring to this before because we had to talk about one championship breaking off a couple of weeks ago with breaking off the talks with him. I guess I can kind of see two truths to this. I mean, a mix of both, in that Joshua was saying, oh, he wanted this, this, and this, and I don't think he did. But at the same time, when you get an offer like Francis got from the PFL, obviously you're going to want to have that offer matched. And it seemed like Chatri didn't match it. But I can, you get what I mean? I could see it from both angles, in that, Francis saying, oh, I mean, there wasn't really much that he could do, because you had the Ariel Helwani report that Chatri was told that there was a significant offer on the table. And it seemed like in the interview he did with Ariel Helwani recently, Francis said that any reports about Bare Knuckle coming to him are not true. Bare Knuckle never reached out.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, do you believe that claim that BKFC did not was not in this running? Do you believe that to be truth as well? Because I personally do.
You personally do believe they weren't in the running?
I do, yes.
I also believe they were not in the running.
And the reason why I say that is because I don't think, and I could be wrong, I don't have a relationship with David Feldman or anything like that, although I do have a hilarious voicemail that I kept from him. He somehow got my phone number. That's it. That's a story. That's a story for another time. And I'm not joking about that, but nonetheless, I don't think they were in the running for him simply because I don't think they could afford him.
Yes, and I don't know, Zain. I don't know if you got this vibe from that Prince interview. It seemed like he didn't really have much of an interest into going into bare knuckle.
No, I didn't think so either.
So I'm just trying to think. I think we got all the points that we need to about this Francis deal as of right now, as it relates to the PFL. Overall, just big scoop. Francis gets what he wants. PFL gets the fighter that they've been looking for. This is a winning situation all around. Let's see what happens when he actually enters the PFL cage next year.
Absolutely, and I think assuming he knows what happened, I'm sure whoever told Dana White this news, I'm sure that Dana probably had no words, and he might have laughed a little bit, but that was probably it. That's just a highly educated guess, but I could be very wrong, or he could have said, "I simply don't care."
Either way. So, Zain, we're going to stick with the PFL because there's a couple other news stories about the PFL. And one of them, Zain, Francis Ngannou is not the only interesting pickup that the PFL has had of late. No, also during the week between last episode and this, Zain, former GLORY Kickboxing welterweight champion Cedric Doumbe has signed with the PFL. Now, this is an interesting story because Cedric Doumbe was signed to the UFC last year to compete on the UFC Paris card. Obviously, Doumbe is from France. And apparently, there were issues with the deal, and issues supposedly, according to him, through some medical, physical looks with with uh with the UFC doctors, in which the UFC doctors, because of I think it had something to do with his head and blood on the internal side of it. I'll look up the specifics again, but they would not clear Cedric Doumbe to fight. So that deal fell through, and here's the PFL saying, come join us, Cedric.
Yeah, I mean, good for Cedric for getting picked up by the PFL. And according to an interview that he did, I'm blanking on with so my apologies there. But he did an interview where he said that the PFL contract that they offered him would have been 10 times more money, or is 10 times more money than what it would have been with the UFC. So that just goes to show that Doumbe was doing the best that he could in making a worthy investment and
MMA
taking
hour.
a negative.
Sorry, MMA hour, by the way.
Oh, okay, cool. What I was going to say was he was taking a negative situation and turning it into a positive, and that's exactly what happened.
So here's the full situation explained from his side. I'm going to take the quote here from the transcription of the MMA hour. A doctor made a mistake in that test, and it said that I have blood in my brain. And I used to do it like so many times when I fought. I had one boxing for it, and when I used to do it, I signed the paper to the UFC. I didn't even check, and they responded to us that I can't fight because the MRI is so bad. So that's why I didn't fight at UFC Paris. That was a very big mistake. Despite letting the UFC representatives know that he was cleared to compete by, quote, 3 different doctors, the promotion ultimately parted ways with Doumbe due to the MRI issues.
Very interesting. Personally, I think there's more to the story, but of course, he's willing to share whatever he feels. So we're not one to judge him in any sort of way. I'm just happy that he got the deal that he was looking for, and now he has a home. So that's the big thing. And if you've never seen Doumbe fight,
You're missing something.
Even with him not signing with the UFC, and even with him coming from GLORY, I think it's great for the PFL that such a huge name wants to be there and is now finally there. It's just unfortunate the UFC wasn't seeing the same story that the doctors were sharing with him, and the communication just got misconstrued. Is what I meant to say.
The other part of this story I want to take, Zain, is you look at what happened with the Francis, and you look what happened here. To talk about Francis and all he got, the fact that Doumbe says, "Oh, my deal is 10 times bigger than what the UFC was going to give me." It should there be a little concern? Well, I don't know if concern is the right word, but maybe more of a reality that we're going to see other fighters basically choose to get away from the UFC in order to try and go outside of the normal whatever the pay structure is, your normal 5K to win, 5K to show, 5K to win, etc. Are we going to see more promotions start to give a little more than just what the UFC normally does with the show money and the win money? And do you think that the expectation is we'll see fighters taking such offers? And should the UFC be concerned about that?
My opinion on that is I think it all depends on the promotion and what the investors are willing to invest. I think what we've seen now in these last several days that if they're willing to put the money up and they're willing to pay the fighters what they're worth, good things are going to happen. If the promotion wants to keep all the money, you're going to keep seeing more guys earn 5K and 5K and 5K to show and win than you are guys who maybe want that bigger payday. So I think the fighters can make the best decisions for themselves, but I think it ultimately comes down to the promotion and what they're willing to give, because sometimes the fighters are only left with so few options. And of course, this Francis signing doesn't automatically mean that everyone's going to go to the PFL. But if some of these free agents can play their cards right and the PFL believes in them as much as they did with Francis, you could end up seeing a trend. But in terms of right now, I think it's going to slowly start to happen, but maybe it'll come to a halt in several months because of a new development that we don't know about. But I do think that it is definitely a possibility for sure.
All right. One other note to make mention of with the PFL. So we've had a lot of very good, and then there is also the unfortunate. So you have seen now over the past couple of days, a couple of PFL fighters were suspended and basically can no longer take part in the season tournaments. That number is now up to 9 that have been suspended by commissions for drug test failures, and the regular season for the PFL is going to take a little bit of a shakeup. In fact, Zain, I think Cedric Doumbe is going to compete in the Atlanta card, and he's going to enter the season mid-season.
Yeah, you want to talk about a massive signing and a boost to the first Atlanta show or the Atlanta card coming up in June. You can't get a bigger boost than that, can you? Right?
Not at all. That's big.
Obviously.
Okay, hang on. Sorry, I do have some of the names because there are some interesting names that are part of these suspensions. The top names, and I think, is the former UFC light heavyweight title challenger Thiago Santos, the former heavyweight champion of PFL Bruno Capoloza. There are also several other names. Okay, Will Fleury, UFC alumnus Christoph Jocko, Mohamed Fakrdine, Rizvan Kuniev, Cesar Ferreira, Alejandro Flores, and Daniel Torres. So here are some of the changes that are being made as a result of these suspensions. So Ty Flores is in against Rob Wilkinson on June 8th. Tyler Diamond will replace Daniel Torres against Mavlid Khaibuvlev. Santos Fakrdine were supposed to fight. That fight is now canceled because both of them have been suspended. Ty Flores was supposed to fight Jocko. Gabriel Barga will replace Alejandro Flores against Marlon Moraes. Taylor Johnson, PFL veteran Andrew Sanchez will enter the light heavyweight scene. Impa Casanagne and Tim Cameron will be on the card. Defending PFL heavyweight champion Ante Delia, who is thought to be out for the season, is now going to come back against Maurice Green. Patrick Brady, Jordan Heiderman is in. OAM will now fight Anthony Romero. As we mentioned, all these cards are now going to be in Atlanta for the second half of the PFL regular season, which takes place in June.
A lot of UFC alumni on that list. That's for sure. I mean, the biggest name jumps out right off the bat like a sort of thumb is Thiago Santos. I mean, what a fall from grace that guy has had ever since nearly beating John Jones a couple years ago. It's a real shame that he's not able to compete, considering he's still very dangerous. He just hasn't found his consistency in the last several years, ever since leaving the UFC.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say, and it definitely does not help a situation like this where we don't know when he's going to fight again. A couple of other names on that list. I do find it interesting, Zan, that, like I mentioned, Cedric Doumbe is now going to be fighting in the June cards. You got Ante D'Elia, who, Zan, if I'm not mistaken, you referred to last week as the Who when we were talking about the Francis Ngannou signing with the Ariel Helwani clip that we played.
I sure did. I sure did.
So, him to you is going to be Jeremy Stephens to Conor McGregor, I think.
Yeah, that's a pretty darn good comparison. And I really hope my words get eaten, because I want to see him do well. That name just didn't ring a bell as soon as it was presented to me. So my apologies to Ante and his team if they are watching this, or if they have even heard of me. Please do not slander me the next time I reach out and request an interview. I promise I will know about you the first time we talk, hopefully in the near future, later this year.
Hopefully. I mean, Zan, the only thing I can really say is, I mean, what else can you say? The PFL, they said in a statement, has a zero tolerance policy against any drug testing failures, and I mean, it definitely hurts, but at the same time, we've seen now how the PFL, Zan, the PFL is the home of craziness sometimes, and we've seen the kind of shakeups that they can have. And PFL, credit to them, they have managed to pull together still, the Atlanta cards. And ultimately, if you're a fighter who is suspended here, I mean, you're responsible for what you put in your body, and you gotta, especially Zan. The second part I'm going to say, especially somebody like Thiago Santos, who you have an opportunity to come away with $1 million at the end of this year, and it's basically a you blew it kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, they absolutely blew it in their own regard, and also, especially for a guy like Santos, that tax on a year of inactivity, and with his age, it's not good. I mean, he wanted to restart his career in a new promotion, and that's gotten off to a really bad start, especially with this. So, yeah, I mean, nonetheless, if you want to act like a professional, you need to be a professional, and these 9 fighters simply did not do that. And with the amount of seasons that the PFL has had so far, they should know better than that.
And like I said, this is probably one of the biggest shakeups that we've had with the PFL since they've begun the regular season format in, I think it was 2018. And now, like I said, they're rolling with the punches. So credit on them for being able to, put things together, have backup plans.
Now, the biggest issue, though, is if more fighters get suspended and the names become more prevalent, then they have a serious problem. So,
but as of right now, it's the 9 fighters, and like I said, we're going forward. PFL's going strong. Can't wait to watch the second half of the season this June.
Oh, I am too. I'm very much looking forward to it. And overall, minus that negative news, it was a very positive day for the Professional Fighters League. And I don't know about you, Tom. I'm going to emphasize it again. I think they're making a real case that they are, if not already, the number 2 MMA promotion in the world.
Big time. We said that they had the opportunity to do this when we were first talking about Francis's free agency back in January.
Mm-hmm.
And Zain, I will say, speaking of the battle for the number 2 promotion in the world, speaking of things to get, MMA outsiders involved with the, at these events and the activity and all the excitement, Zain, June 16th is going to be a very interesting day. I'll be focused, I think, on the PFL card in Atlanta. That's the second part of the second half of the regular season. And you'll be in Chicago for Bellator 297.
Yeah, so we will be at the two rival competitor promotions, if you will, watching their respective events and doing our respective duties, if you will. So
And
yeah.
I'm sure, once we're done with that, we're gonna watch the other that we missed. So we'll flop basically.
Yeah, so that means I'll watch Bellator, you'll watch PFL, and then we'll flip flop. Yeah.
Exactly. The next day should be a fun weekend of fights. But then, as we kind of alluded to, the UFC. Maybe they were watching a little something. You talked about Dana before and what his reaction would be. Well, maybe he didn't have a reaction to the news, but he said, "You know what? There's a lot of craziness going on in the MMA sphere." And he said, "Wait a minute. Hang on. I've got my own craziness."
Yeah, I mean, as I alluded to last week, how Dana claims to never read the media. There's no way he was not reading the internet today because some bombshell UFC news did drop about a couple of hours before we were set to record, let's say, and the news is pretty massive. So let me break it down. UFC
Let me break it down in one sentence before you break it down. The BMF title is back.
Yeah, the BMF title is back in a major way. The UFC is back in Salt Lake City, Utah, for the second time this year, which Dana White is very excited about, as he should be. It seems like he has a good relationship with Utah Jazz management and ownership. Nonetheless, UFC 291 will take place July 29th in Salt Lake City, a rematch that's like between 5.5 and 6 years in the making, so to speak. Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje for the BMF title, and what is the most quintessential BMF title fight that I think we have ever seen. Just two bad dudes that are going to go at it from the second the fight starts until the second the fight ends. These two have been in massive fights before. This isn't for a legitimate title, so to speak, but no doubt the winner of this fight is definitely in contention for the lightweight strap either later this year or early next year. And then, of course, we have the highly anticipated light heavyweight debut of the former UFC middleweight champion, Alex Pereira, taking on the former UFC light heavyweight champion, Jan Blachowicz. Tom, you want to talk about a unbelievable co-main event? Someone is getting finished in that fight, and I don't know who it's going to be just yet, but there's no way that fight is going the distance because it's simply won't unless something just astronomical happens and the fight's boring, which I highly. There's no way that Blachowicz versus Pereira is not exciting.
I mean, Zain, UFC is coming strong in July. You got Poirier Gaethje too. Their first fight was fun as hell in April of 2018, which Poirier won, finishing Gaethje, I think, in the 4th round. And then you have, as you mentioned, Alex Pereira, and he doesn't get an easy task at light heavyweight. And, when the fighters move weight classes, the UFC tends to not give them an easy showing, and he gets a former champion in Blachowicz.
I think this is a win and you get the title shot. Lose and you have to work your way all the way back up.
Oh, that's absolutely what this is for Pereira.
That's what I think. Yeah.
It absolutely is what it is. As far as Poirier and Gaethje goes, I mean, BMF title, sure. I mean, Dana says it's vacant. I think there are certain George Masvidal fans who would like to argue anyways, that he is the BMF forever and ever. But here with Poirier and Gaethje too, I mean, Zain, I have to borrow actually a little bit from fan-sided term used for the Poirier and Gaethje, the kinds of fighters they are. They are people's champions. Actually, I could say I borrowed it for The Rock too, because that's what the BMF title kind of is. Got Poirier and Gaethje kind of are. They're fighters for the people. Even when they're not competing in championship fights, even when they fall short of the actual undisputed gold, people still look at them and treat them as champions. And this fight, 5 rounds, BMF title, main event of a UFC pay-per-view, is going to be absolutely fantastic, and I cannot wait.
Oh, 100%. I don't have a pick for this fight, but this is without a doubt. I think you could pencil this in right now. What is this? May 17th this is airing. May 17th, 2023. I think you can pencil this in right now as not just a fight of the year candidate, but it'll win fight of the year.
Poirier Gaethje, I could totally see that happening. Absolutely. I'm not sure who I'm gonna go with. I mean, as of this moment, I'm leaning slightly to Poirier.
I think so. I think so too.
Maybe I'm leaning slightly to Poirier and slightly towards Pereira, but that's as of us 2 months out. When we get closer to this card, my hype level is going to be through the roof, and I'm definitely going to be doing, a lot more focusing and thinking about this fight. I cannot wait to see it.
Tom, is this the greatest late July UFC main event that they've had in years? Because it certainly feels that way.
Obviously, they haven't done late July cards every year, but Zain, since Jones Cormier too, absolutely.
Yeah, Jones Cormier too, and I guess before that, another one you'd have to look at is Lawler versus Woodley from UFC 201. Yeah.
That was the year prior.
That was also late July in Atlanta, Georgia. So there you go. At the old Phillips Arena, if you will. Nonetheless, UFC 291 was just one of the cards that was announced in the UFC special announcement live stream. We also have some more clarity about UFC 292. So here we go. The biggest bantamweight title fight in several years. Aljamain Sterling, the heel, if you will, versus everybody's favorite golden boy, the golden goose, if you will, a guy that I've been high on ever since day one when he made his debut on Dana White's Contender Series in 2017. It's finally his moment. Aljamain Sterling versus, whether you like it or not, Sean O'Malley for the undisputed UFC bantamweight title. And then, of course, the co-main event isn't bad either. We have Weili Zhang taking on Amanda Lemos. Honestly, you couldn't ask for 2 better fights to top the UFC's first trip back to Boston in almost 4 years. I think everybody at the TD Garden that night is going to get their money's worth and a little bit more, because those were some phenomenal, and especially that main event with so much bad blood, riding with Sterling, O'Malley, and then, of course, the outsider, Merab Dvalishvili, of course.
Yeah, so here's what I'm going to say. I am one of those people, Zain, who isn't exactly the greatest on Sean O'Malley in terms of popularity and such. I'm not a fan I'm not, on the level of fan like everybody else is around Sean O'Malley, but I will recognize, and I recognized last week, he is the UFC's golden boy, and they are putting him in. Zain, I don't know if they can give him any bigger of an opportunity. I don't like the fact that he's getting this fight off of a controversial split decision loss to Peter Yan, split decision win over Peter Yan, which I believe he lost that fight. And then he sits out all these months and he's going to get a title shot. But they've set it up well for a golden boy. Aljamain Sterling just defended the Bantamweight Championship very recently. And now here he is, a tough fight with Henry Cejudo. And now here he is, Sean O'Malley, getting in the cage, challenging him. And they get those set. The UFC gets the setup that the plan was August 19th in Boston, just a few months after the defense. This is a big opportunity for O'Malley to win it, especially when you consider the circumstances of the bad blood, Merab on the outside, Sterling having defended the title. Now, here's going to be my thing, Zain. If O'Malley wins, it's definitely going to be a big moment for UFC history. Coming from the Contender Series to winning the gold, I would think he would be the second after Jamal Hill to do such a thing.
He would be.
But, yep. Zain, could you see a situation where after O'Malley wins, they say, okay, since now it presents an opportunity for Merab to fight for the title, I think I kind of alluded last week, Zan. If O'Malley fights Merab in a title fight, I see Merab wiping the floor with him. I think that would be a
See,
big mistake on the UFC's part.
I don't think that fight happens first. I actually think that if O'Malley wins, they're going to do an immediate rematch.
I could see that happening as well.
And the reason why I say that is because Sterling has held the bantamweight title for quite a few years now, and there would be a lot to sell in a second fight versus if you just do the Merab fight right away, given that there's still going to be that bad blood brewing over the Merab controversy and him not getting the fight. Now, my theory is this. I really do think that Sterling begged and pleaded with the UFC to make sure that this Merab fight didn't happen. I can't say that for certain, but the way that Sterling talks about Merab and how he doesn't want to fight him and he's been super vocal about it, I really do think the UFC gave into some sort of command where it's just like we don't want to
Then you have to fight O'Malley, basically.
right, and we don't want to go back into a Francis John Jones situation where all we're doing is toying with money. So they feel like, okay, in order to save face, we'll give O'Malley the fight. And O'Malley was asking for the fight, and I feel like since O'Malley doesn't have a manager and he's quite close with the UFC brass, from what it seems like, there's no way they weren't going to tell him no. Don't give me the fight. So that's my theory on that. I'm going to go out on a whim, and you're going to hate me for this, but I actually think O'Malley beats him. I
think so too. I think, like I said, it's a perfect opportunity. He's coming off of a hard title defense already. You've got O'Malley, being so rested.
A fight that, even though you and I agree was scored correctly, a fight that a lot of people were heavily debating, did Sterling actually win?
Well, again, we both believe that Sterling won, but if you look by the judges' scorecards, that really controversial fifth round, that one judge that gave the fight to Sterling, that fifth round to Sterling, if it's been scored correctly, Cejudo would be the champion, and then this division would be completely jumbled up.
Yeah. That's the right way to describe it without getting too deep into an alternate history, if you will. But yeah, this should be a very good main event. That's for sure.
Also, the co-main event, can't forget Weili Zhang against Amanda Lemos. You would have to think, Zan, that the hope for, I don't know if it's for the UFC or just for fight fans, is that Zhang wins, so that way we can really book Zhang versus Yang Zhenao for the title.
Yeah, I think that's what the UFC is banking on. Yep. And I think it's going to be, my opinion is, if that is what happens, don't be surprised if in January of 24, the main event is that fight for the first pay-per-view of 2024.
Or if they can get either a pay-per-view or a fight night card in China.
I don't see how this title fight goes on a fight night, though. That's the thing.
Even if they bring this to China, I mean, Dana was open to it, I think, when he said it at the press conference.
Yeah, but in terms of a fight night with a championship, you don't really see that anymore. Unless they break the mold, I don't see how they do it on a fight night. But I agree with you. That is the fight that the UFC, more of the we ideally wants, is Zain versus Diaz or not. Yeah,
for sure. All right, couple other news nuggets before we get into the review.
Wait, before you continue, that now leaves two options for the UFC. They either do McGregor versus Chandler in September or McGregor versus Chandler in December. If they want to get it done this year, I think those are their only two options.
I really don't think, Sam, it makes much sense to do this tough season and then not do the fight until December. The fact that August in Boston, again, very Irish population, is booked for August, that would lead me to believe, as we kind of talked about last week, it has to be September in Las Vegas. That's my only thought. Because October, like we said, it's going to be Islam Makhachev defending the title. Now, whether he defends against the BMF title winner of Poirier versus Gaethje 2, or he defends against the winner of Charles Oliveira versus Beneil Dariush next month, that remains to be seen. But UFC, like I kind of has said for a couple of weeks now, is not going to go into Fight Island, Abu Dhabi, and not have Islam Makhachev as the main event.
Oh, 1000%. So my prediction, obviously we don't know, and I don't know any extra information than you do. If I would, I would have revealed it. My prediction though is that I think it's going to be September. They're gonna do that fight, and my prediction is it's going to be Allegiant Stadium, and they're gonna do it. They're gonna do it the same weekend as the newly announced Bellator card. In my opinion.
Oh, that would actually be interesting. That I think, Zan, if I can pull up the calendar, I think September of 23 begins. Yeah, it's 2/9, 16, 23, 30. So, judging by August 19th being the card, as we kind of thought after the whole, what if they did a thing on August 5th kind of felt. So that would lead me to believe 3 weeks. So 23rd would be the latest we get a UFC pay-per-view for September, if not the 9th or 16th. I don't think they do it on the 9th, that they do it right before the NFL season kicks off. And I don't know about the 16th. I could very well see if they're going to try to get all the hype that they can. You're right.
Well,
September 23rd.
well, the reason why I don't think they'll do the 16th is I think they're reserving that for Canelo.
Oh, yeah.
That's gonna,
Mexican Independence Day weekend.
Yeah, that's going to be when Canelo fights. So that means that only leaves them with a couple options. And I think the 23rd. I think the 23rd makes the most sense.
At this point, Zan, at this point, between what they just booked for Boston and what they're doing for July with 291 and this tough season, like, and not to mention, Zan, we even talked about it with Leon and Colby and Islam. Like, if it's not Saturday, September 23rd in Las Vegas, when and what the hell is it then? Like, that's the point. Like, it's time for answers. I think I could agree. It's time for answers to start to come up as we're getting ready for this tough season.
Yeah, and in Dana's exact words, he said that he and his team will be working very hard. His words, not mine, direct quote, very hard to put that fight together. So let's see what very hard actually means. But given what we have just discussed, September 23rd, I think is the only logical option if they want to do September. But I need to know because I need to figure out if I can somehow go or not. Because I want to somehow be there.
Come on, Connor, get the fight signed.
I want to know because I went to his last one, so I want to be able to say that I went to 2 Conor McGregor fights in a row. That would be amazing.
That'd be nuts. All right, couple of our news nuggets. You know what? I was gonna go to the Paul Diaz one, but you know what? Since we're on the topic of Connor, he had an interesting tweet the other day saying that he is not going to retire until he breaks the all-time UFC knockout record. Which, San, you want my answer? You want my response to that? No disrespect to the power and precision of Conor McGregor strikes, but win a meaningful fight, please, before you start doing this.
Yeah, not only win a meaningful fight, but that'll probably mean, yeah, I'll fight once and I'll knock out Chandler. And then, for the heck of it, I'll take 2 years off. Then I'll take another fight. Then I'll take 2 more years off. And then it gets to the point where it's 8 years later, he's trying to break the knockout record at like 41 years old.
UFC is going to create a seniors division exclusively for him. So the PFL is going to have a super fight division, and the UFC is going to have a seniors division.
I mean, at this point, with what the UFC has done for Conor and bent over backwards for him, I honestly think anything is possible at this point. But no, that will not happen. Number one, and number two, Conor McGregor versus Matt Brown will not sell any pay-per-views. So don't give anybody any weird ideas.
Sorry, Immortal One.
Yeah.
You had a great finish. You had a great finish last weekend. Just
You did. You gotta tone it down a little bit.
All right. Let's talk about this press conference.
Yeah, so let me break it down. So last week, Jake Paul and Nate Diaz had their tickets on sale press conference ahead of their August 5th boxing match in Dallas. Actually, before I get into this, there's a little theory. My friend or my Twitter mutual, Ryan Federo, has a theory that he believes that the UFC knows that Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz is falling apart. And he thinks that there is a contingency plan in place that if that fight does fall apart, Nate Diaz will be immediately re-signed back to the UFC. And instead of Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler, it'll be Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 3, the fight that everybody's been waiting for, instead of Michael Chandler by the time the tough season is over. I find that to be very odd, but I'm also very intrigued because I've been wanting to see the third fight for a long time.
I understand that. Yes, we've wanted to see the third fight for a while. But if that happens, then what the hell is the point of this tough season?
I have one answer for you. Ratings for ESPN, my friend. Ratings and money.
Oh, hang on. I wasn't ready for that second part. You said money?
Yeah. Money, and more money. That's all it is.
And Conor promotion.
Exactly. 100%. By the way, very interesting that we still don't know what's going on with Conor McGregor's USADA status. And at this point, we might never know what's going on with it.
He's going to get the exemption. You know, he's going to get the Brock Lesnar treatment.
Of course he will. They're trying to treat UFC 293 like it's UFC 300 a little bit early. That's probably what it'll end up being.
So are you saying Jim Miller's going to fight at UFC 293 too?
I don't know. You never know.
Well, I know Jim Miller is booked for a fight very soon.
Oh, he certainly is, isn't he?
He's fighting June 3rd against Klein.
Yeah, so there's still time to make a September fight if he wins. Yeah.
It's possible. Yeah, a
lot went on at this press conference. Ariel Helwani was the moderator for it, and there was a certain media member that I guess we could just call Derek because that is what he goes by, and he challenged the Diaz brothers to a fight, and as two of us that have been in combat sports media and in journalism media for a long time, anyone watching this that is trying to get into the industry, what Derek did is something that you just don't do. So whatever you do not challenge professional prize fighters saying that you would try to kick their ass when you know in your heart that you wouldn't stand a chance. So don't even try.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Really? You are going to get up there and try to say that you can whoop the Diaz brothers? You know what they would do to you? They would do more than Stockton slap you, my friend. They would completely pulverize you.
Yeah, they would not.
Recognizable.
Yeah, not only would they pulverize you, they'd probably rob you at the same time too, right?
They would just completely destroy you. Like what? And Zain, we've been at our fair share of events where it's like the questioning. I mean, Zain, I was at the rooftop press conference for Diaz and Masvidal, where somebody, maybe it was Derek again, said that Nate Diaz couldn't be the BMF because he's a vegetarian.
Yeah, I have not done my research on that specifically, but I would not be surprised. Although Jake Paul wasn't known to the general public back then, and Derek's affiliate was Better Media, which is associated with Jake Paul, so there's probably no way it was him, but it was probably some sort of version of him. Let's just put it that way.
And at the same press conference where somebody said "Go Pats" to Dana just to get a good laugh out of him.
Yeah, which by the way, given that it was a UFC press conference, I actually would kind of let that slide. If it was at an NFL press conference, I think I would have I think I would have given a shoulder shrug, but that one was actually pretty funny. I will say in the, well, I guess how do I say this? In the one formal press conference I have been to for Bellator back at Bellator 288, I think there were some very well behaved media members there that knew what they were doing, and there certainly was not a single fanboy that I came across. Obviously, we have about an equal number of in-person press conference experiences, so we obviously don't know the entire ins and outs, but that's certainly something that if you're trying to get into the business, you simply don't do what Derek from Better Media did. But in terms of that, though, Nate Diaz did make a very good point that there really weren't any normal civilized people at the press conference that day.
No.
And Tom, I'm sure that you could probably agree with it. And this is also a message to DAZN's vetting team. Make sure you vet people that have actually had a little bit of experience in the industry and aren't just associated with the fighters, because that's technically a conflict of interest too. You can't do that.
I mean, but what about the Mac life?
Yeah, well, they're actually a legitimate news outlet, though. I mean, let's be honest.
Okay, maybe when it first started, very Connor heavy, but I guess you're right over the course of time. But I mean,
same with my current outlet.
Fair enough.
It had its leaps and bounds, and now it's known as a very credible MMA news site.
Again, fair enough. But here's my point, Zain. Because we talked about weeks ago about the fact that Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz is on DAZN of all things. You don't think DAZN kind of partially wants this so they can, stir the pot a little bit to try and get some of that fight hype?
Yeah, and that can be played in a promo over and over and over and over again. Put some really nice hype music to it, and over and over and over again. You just stir the pot a little more as the days trickle down to August 5th. So there you go. If the fight even happens, you have to remember this weekend is cursed because last year Jake Paul was supposed to fight at Madison Square Garden on this exact weekend, and that did not materialize. They had to cancel the event.
It's as cursed as the number 33 in MMA.
That is exactly right. Do you have any final thoughts on this press conference, quote unquote, if you even want to call it that, or more of a sideshow?
Look at all the failure.
There you go.
And do you expect anything less for the press conference that will be the week of the fight?
No, it'll probably be about the same.
Okay, fair enough.
One other thing I want to note before we move on to our reviews and previews. So the WWE and the UFC, that merged company, spin-off company from Endeavor, whatever you want to call it. It has a name. It's just going to be called the TKO Group. There was a few days ago where it had been SEC paperwork that it was going to be called New Whale Inc., which, I mean, maybe makes sense for WWE, headquartered in Connecticut, home of the previous Hartford Whalers before they became the Carolina Hurricanes, who are currently playing in the Eastern Conference Final.
Yep.
But obviously, TKO Group makes much more sense than, yeah. I mean, at this point, it's still business as usual, as they kind of said it was going to be.
Yeah, I like the name. I really do. I think it sticks with the Bravada brand, and I think it makes a lot of sense for both parties, and I think they should be happy with it. I liked it. I like the name.
I do too. All right, but we're not Wall Street people. We're fight people. Let's get into the recaps from this past weekend. Let's start with Bellator. So, Fabian Edwards, Gegard Mousasi, not the most exciting fight. I will say, however, I am a little shocked that Fabian Edwards nearly swept Gegard on the scorecards. First time, by the way, that Gegard Mousasi has lost consecutive fights in his MMA career.
Yeah, pretty shocking, and it made my Bellator rankings job pretty easy this week as to where I should put Edwards. So thank you, Edwards, for making my job seamless. Nonetheless, it's a good win. He beat a legend of the sport, did what he needed to do, and sometimes those wins don't have to be the most exciting as long as you get the job done, and that's exactly what Edwards did in France, and it sets up an even bigger fight now with Johnny Eblen for the belt in September, which should be a phenomenal card from Dublin. Obviously, Tom, this was a great win for Edwards, though. Neutralized Mousasi's game, took away his gas tank, prevented him from throwing any power shots. Edwards was not hurt during the fight at all. It seemed like Mousasi was just one step forward, two steps back the entire fight, and just couldn't get any relative offense going from what Edwards tried to counter with. And Edwards basically just did whatever he wanted. What did you think of the fight?
Yeah, basically that, Mousasi tried to just I mean, it was a very bit of a slow start. You saw Edwards kind of working his jab a little bit. You had the controversial illegal knee that was ruled during, I think it was the middle of the second round, but Fabian Edwards kind of kept his distance and basically chose not to take the fight down. Mousasi finally was able to get a takedown like late in the fight, but this was classic, like you said, kind of shut Mousasi's strategies down, kept his distance, forced Mousasi to keep coming forward. Edwards landed with his range, and Mousasi, as you said, his gas tank was completely taken away. This was a very strong performance from Fabian Edwards, and dare I say, it's going to be quite the fight to watch come September when he challenges Eblen for the middleweight title. You saw the two in the octagon, and, maybe not as intense as Aljamain Sterling and Sean O'Malley, but you could see there a little bit of a, I'm going to get you kind of vibe.
Yeah, I actually am picking Eblen as my early prediction, but would not be surprised if Edwards pulls off the upset and wins in the third or fourth round, just because, just like his brother, you never know. He could pull a cat out of the hat, so to speak, and something crazy could happen.
I was going to bring up that point. Yeah, maybe Fabian Edwards is the better story for, winning, that he and his brother can both be champions in the top two promotions in the world. I mean, two of the top promotions in the world.
You can fact check me on this, but when was the last time you had two brothers potentially be champion in their respective promotions, or is this like a historic first ever?
Well,
That's
I'd say Patricky last
besides,
year.
yeah, besides the Pitbull brothers is what I meant.
But besides the Pitbull brothers, I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing. But still, though, a very famous last name, having a chance to do something that his brother also did in the UFC, very good for Edwards. And you just got to give him all the respect in the world. Beating a guy like Mousasi that's been around since the mid-'90s, it's easy to say how long he's been around. But I still think Mousasi is one of the best in the world. But I feel like if he loses 3 in a row, I think it's time to start throwing the R word around. Based on how he looks in his next performance, what do you think?
I mean, Fabian Edwards is still one of the top performers at middleweight, so I mean, I'm hesitant to use that word on Mousasi just yet. Like you said, let's see how he looks in his next fight. Let's see what happens in the kind of direction that he and Bellator are going to go in after this.
For sure. Very impressive win for Edwards, though.
Co-main event, important fight, Bellator lightweight Grand Prix fight. Brent Primus getting the win over Mansur Bernoui in a very, very close fight. It was basically 3 rounds to 2 where I had it. And now, as a result of his win, as part of the tournament, Brent Primus is next in line for Usman Nurmagomedov.
Yeah, and you already know where I'm going in that fight. I think Nurmagomedov beats him, but I think Primus is going to give Usman the toughest fight of his life. That's for sure. That's going to be a war of attrition. The second the fight starts until the second the referee tells them to stop. That's going to be one of the best fights of the year, whenever that takes place for Bellator. And it's one of those fights where if you've never seen either of those guys fight before, that's going to be all action. That's for sure.
Do you think Primus manages to get it to go to distance, or do you think Usman gets the sub?
I think Usman submits him late in the fight. I think it goes to the fourth round and Primus tires out and he gets submitted. What do you think?
I'm gonna say around round 3, round 4, he gets the submission.
So similar to me. Okay, gotcha.
Similar. I'd say similar, maybe a little earlier, maybe closer to mid-fight.
Would you be shocked if Nurmagomedov got beat somehow? Because I would be personally.
If Brent Primus, no disrespect to him, but if Brent Primus managed to defeat Usman Nurmagomedov, that would have to be up there for top 3, if not top 2 upsets of 2023.
And one of the biggest upsets in promotional history by far.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Switching over now to Charlotte, North Carolina. Jailton Almeida gets the win, submitting Jairzinho Rozenstruik.
Called this one.
Yeah, so Almeida now, I believe, at number 9 in the UFC heavyweight rankings, and I think Almeida has cemented himself as one to watch in this division.
Good point. I mean, let me see here. I mean, yeah, he's definitely cemented himself as a threat in the heavyweight division for sure. I mean, that's without a doubt his biggest win in terms of a name in his career.
Rozenstruik did not look good in this fight. Again, he was easily taken down. I mean, credit to him that he was able to not, avoid the submissions, avoid the choke for as long as he did. But eventually, Almeida got to his back, got the choke, and it was just over in one round. And it was kind of another disappointing performance. I mean, we talked about Francis Ngannou earlier in the show, and remember there was once a time where Jairzinho Rozenstruik was put in front of Francis Ngannou as a true test, and Francis easily had his way with him. Rozenstruik, Zain, I mean, his 2019 was incredible. He was, I think, the UFC's best fighter in terms of people who had arrived to the promotion in 2019 in that year. And ever since then, it's been a rough going.
Yeah, I would say the next logical fight for Almeida, though, is Almeida versus Blades. What do you think?
I like that fight.
And the reason why I say that is Blades has struggled as of late, has not looked good. Almeida's on a run that I don't think a lot of people expected. And if Almeida beats Blades, breaks into the top 5 that way, if he isn't already in the top 5, he'll be ready for a title shot sooner than you think. I think he needs one more fight. I said it on Twitter the other day. I answered a poll question. I said I think he needs one more fight before you consider him fighting for a championship.
I think he could use another fight or two. Heavyweight right now is a very volatile. I mean, it has its talent, but it's volatile right now with the UFC because, like we talked about, what happens if come November Jones beats Stipe and heads out of the promotion? Then everything is up for grabs.
Yeah, and then it'll probably end up being somehow that Jailton Almeida becomes the Jamal Hill of the UFC heavyweight division and is somehow thrusted into a title fight that nobody was expecting.
It's possible.
You never know.
Co-main event, Johnny Walker over Anthony Smith. I don't really have much to say. It was kind of boring. You had the little tease that maybe Anthony Smith would retire in the octagon. He didn't, but I think it's time. Like we didn't use the word for Gegard, but for Anthony Smith, I think it's time.
I think it's time too, and I think Dana was right when he said that Johnny Walker didn't really impress a lot of people, and it's hard to disagree with that.
I don't think either of them did any favors for themselves. Obviously, Anthony Smith's chances at ever being a champion are now done completely. But Johnny Walker, I mean, he could have had a highlight finish, and maybe it's just how the fight wins, but just nothing. That fight did nothing for me. That was kind of really weird during that fight.
No, absolutely nothing. Very, very well said.
All right. But you know what will do something, Zain? Our big fights this weekend. We got 3 fights we got to preview. And leading it off, Zain, I can't believe we're talking about this an hour and 22 minutes into the show and not near the beginning like we thought we could have done when we were talking about this episode first. The undisputed lightweight championship of boxing is on the line. Devin Haney defends the championship against Vasyl Lomachenko. It's Zain. It's quite simply to me one of, if not the face of boxing today versus a guy who was one of the faces of boxing only about 3, 4, 5 years ago.
So you're telling me that you think Devin Haney is a bigger face of boxing than what Gervonta Davis claimed about 3 or 4 weeks ago? We're still giving that distinction to Devin Haney. Is that what you're telling me?
I said one of, if not the. Did I?
You said one of, if not the, but if you're going to say the, do you think Devin Haney is the face of boxing right now?
Before that Tank Davis fight, I would have said yes. Now I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, hey, don't get me wrong. I like Lomachenko. I've watched him for several years. But Tom, let's face it, Devin Haney, Las Vegas, Nevada, his hometown. I don't see who he loses. I really don't.
The only thing
I, all,
the only thing
all
for
I know.
crowd, sorry, the only
Go
thing
on.
for the
No,
crowd,
you go.
the
Go
only
ahead.
thing for the crowd's sake, I will say is Lomachenko has a country on his back, though. I think this is his first, maybe second fight since Ukraine, the attacks.
Yeah, it's his second fight.
So he's gonna have a country behind him.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way this fight doesn't suck, right? I mean, it's gonna be fantastic.
This has to be one of, like, the expectation at this point is that it should be one of the fights for the year for boxing.
I think so too. The question is it worth the pay-per-view price tag just for this one fight? That's the question. I'd say it's one of those rare times where yes, it actually is.
Yes. What it's like $59.99 on ESPN Plus or $69.99?
$69.99, I think.
I'd say maybe a little much. Maybe I'd say 59, but I'd still say yes.
Yeah. Are you picking Haney to win this fight? Because I personally am.
Yes, I mean, Zain, Lomachenko's talented without a doubt, but his time was kind of a few years ago, and now Devin Haney has solidified himself. I mean, the way that he captured all of the lightweight championships in this sport. I mean, you got to give the credit to him. He really had, showcased the mark that he is leaving on boxing today, whereas Lomachenko, I think Haney's just going to be a little too quick and a little too powerful for Loma in this one. I don't think
I
Loma
think
gets finished. I think Loma puts up a tough and makes it a close fight, but I say Haney by decision.
okay, I'm taking Haney to win in round 9. I think he's gonna stop
You
him.
think he finishes all that? I would go nuts if Haney got the finish of Lomachenko.
I think he will. I really do.
One thing we can agree on the face of boxing comment: both Haney and Tank have surpassed Canelo at this point.
Agreed. Now, do you think it's going to be Haney? Okay, assuming Haney wins, is it going to be a super fight between he and Shakur Stevenson, or is it going to be he and Gervonta Davis for all the marbles to see who the baddest lightweight in the world is?
You know what's funny? Did I not say when we were talking about the Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia fight, did I not say that Shakur Stevenson was a very interesting wild card to watch out for?
You did say that.
And I'm just getting a feeling that I don't think a Haney versus Tank fight happens because I think Shakur Stevenson gets in the way. And Zain, you know what we say about boxing, don't we?
It gets in its own way, but for this weekend only, it does not.
For this weekend only, it does not. And credit where credit is due, Shakur Stevenson is still a hell of a boxer. So I can't necessarily be too mad at that.
Agreed.
All right. But Zain, that's not the only undisputed lightweight championship that's on the line this weekend.
No, it is not.
Women's title is also on the line a few hours beforehand when Katie Taylor defends her undisputed title against Chantel Cameron.
Yeah, if I'm Amanda Serrano, I am sweating like crazy that afternoon because you better believe that I want Katie Taylor, if I'm the Serrano camp, to win because it would be the biggest rematch in the history of women's boxing, period. So if Chantel Cameron ruins this fight, I think Amanda Serrano is going to be pretty pissed off. That's for sure.
Probably, because now maybe you get Taylor and Serrano again. And I mean, but Zain, do we really see any way that Katie Taylor, who is considered one of the best, if not the best women's boxer in the world right now, loses to Chantel Cameron this weekend?
No, and Cameron doesn't even have half the experience that Taylor does. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but
you're right.
I just don't see how it's possible. This feels to me like a version of Ronda Rousey versus Holly Holm, except in this case, Katie Taylor playing the Ronda Rousey role should win. That's how I feel this fight should go and probably will go. By the way, this one is free on DAZN and not DAZN pay-per-view. For anybody curious, we keep harping on DAZN pay-per-view. This one is actually on the free version of DAZN. So,
and I will be keeping an eye on this fight. We have one other women's headliner this weekend. We got one other card coming out this weekend. It's UFC Vegas 73. Apex.
Yeah, this is your prototypical UFC Apex fight. Mackenzie Dern versus Angela Hill. And this just has a dirty controversial decision written all over it. I can already feel it. I don't know about you, but I think Angela Hill was getting screwed on Saturday.
It would be the typical Angela Hill thing to seem like you've won the fight and then lose a controversial split decision, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Zain, here's my question. By the time our show finishes airing on Wednesday, May 17th, will Mark Zuckerberg have bought out the Apex again?
Very well, could be possible. If there were plus odds on it, I would absolutely bet it and say, yes, he will have. Yes.
So some interesting fights this weekend. I think I'm going to keep a big eye on the boxing scene, and no disrespect to Mackenzie Dern and Angela Hill, but when we're getting it to this point, maybe, next week when we get the week off for UFC, it's going to be quite needed. I think even last weekend's Charlotte card kind of gave that sign.
Yeah, absolutely. That the run of UFC after UFC is getting very daunting, but we'll have more coverage to talk about in the coming weeks. We'll also have another women's boxing match that we'll have to talk about in the next several weeks that is actually close to me, and I may or may not be considering going to that fight. But we'll get to that. We'll get into that when it comes. When Clarissa Shields, if you will. But anyway, nonetheless, this was a very packed show, arguably dubbed the biggest show in MMA Outsiders history. But yours truly, again, I am Zain Bando. That is Tom Albano. To my left, you can find my work over at bjpenn.com. I am a Bellator rankings panelist. So you can look for my and every other media member's rankings or group rankings, rather, after every Bellator event. Again, the next one is Bellator 297 on June 16th in Chicago. I will be there for that one. You can find Tom's work over at Advanced MMA, and he'll have some interesting news to drop, which will probably be made public by the time our next episode airs in about a week or so. Again, you can find his work over at Advanced MMA as he is cranking out fight recaps almost on a weekly basis. Of course, be sure to like and subscribe, follow everything that is the Empty the Bench Podcast Network and the MMA Outsiders at MMA Outsiders ETV, so you know everything that's going on with the network. And then, of course, if you don't want to see our faces, you can find the podcast always on audio-only platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Acast, Stitcher, and more, of course. So with that has been another episode of the MMA Outsiders. We had a lot to cover this week. Again, the big takeaway, Francis Ngannou finally has his deal. The former UFC heavyweight champion has a new home, and let's see if PFL can finally be taken for the legitimate organization that it is. For Tom, I'm Zain. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you all next week for another edition of the MMA Outsiders. Same time, same place, and again, no UFC event to cover, but I'm sure we will have a lot of news and notes to break down. Tom, do you have any final thoughts?
Be Joe Pyfer.
Be Joe Pyfer. Enjoy the fights this weekend, everyone, more specifically the boxing, and we will see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.